I've now got the pleasure of introducing David Birch, who's our keynote speaker, who has come up with the fantastic title, You Underestimate the Impact of Stablecoins, and I'm sure he's going to give us a rousing reason why that is the case. So, David, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, and thanks very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Oh yeah, I mustn't forget that. So, I've actually changed the, no, I can't be bothered with that. So I wrote some books, it's not important. I changed the start of my talk because I had some terribly, when I was putting these slides together on Friday, I had some terribly bad news, which was that David Boyle had passed away. And I don't normally do this sort of thing in presentations, but David was such an important person in my thinking about the future of money. A long time ago, he wrote a book called The Money Changers, which was all about how people envisaged changes in the way that money worked, and he was kind enough to include me in that. Some of you will know, some of you are old enough to have attended them. For 21 years, Consult Hyperion used to run a forum in London every year about the future of transactions, and in 2006, he was kind enough to come and give a talk, and he gave one of the best talks I've ever seen about thinking about the way money changes and the way that changes in money affect the economy. And the subject of his talk was, appropriate in the middle of London, the subject of his talk was the ransom of Richard the Lionheart. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the story, which I hope is nobody, Richard was abducted on his way home from the Crusades by Duke Leopold of Austria as a result of a beef which had started at the Siege of Acre. We have long memories in England, by the way, I should say, for foreign visitors. All our stories start roughly around the time of William the Bastard's illegal invasion and genocidal regime change. So, and David made the point about how England was the only country in Europe which was rich enough to be able to pay this kind of ransom, but also had the administrative organisation to do it. And the story of how they raised the taxes, collected. I won't go into it, but it's a fantastic story, and the way it changed the relationship between people and the state and the way taxation worked. It was a brilliant talk, which I can't ever forget. And the book he wrote was called Blondel's Song. And at the time, we bought a copy of the book and we gave it to everybody that came along to the event. And on Friday, I went looking because I thought I remembered that, and sure enough, in my box of books accumulated over the years, I had 2 copies of it left. I've brought them with me, and I'm going to give them to the 2 people that asked the first 2 questions on Slido, as long as they don't involve any bad language. The organisers asked me to say that. So I don't normally start talks like this, but David was a really important person, and you'll see why in a minute. Okay, so here's my basic scenario for how I think about all of these kind of things. Helen was kind enough to buy a few copies of Money in the Metaverse. This is on page 188. If you're at a loose end during the coffee break, there's some copies outside, and I'll be signing a few of them until we run out. So, taking this on board, what's crucial for this is that here, does the laser thing not work? Oh, it doesn't matter. You see, in the middle, the only thing I want you to look at on this diagram here is in the middle where it talks about wallets. Just bear in mind that the principal users of wallets in the not too distant future are AIs and not people. So just hold that at the back of your mind while we talk. Okay, so, right, stablecoins. So what's the basic theory that we're talking about here? So we're in the transition from one kind, I'm sure you've heard a million talks like this, so I'll keep it quick. We're at the transition from one kind of economy to another kind of economy. The money from the old economy doesn't work in the new economy, and one of the reasons is because it's not constructed in that new economy. So we're at a time where we need a new kind of money that's built using the technology of the new economy, and we call that tokens. So welcome to England in 1787. We're in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. The state doesn't provide the money that the country needs in the transition from an agricultural to an industrial age. We need money to pay money wages. We're moving away from subsistence farming to people having to buy things. People are moving into cities. The smallest note that's printed by the Bank of England is a £5 note, which, I don't know the number, somebody here can tell me, but that's like £1 million in today's money or something. So it's completely useless to the vast majority of the population. There's very little circulating coin of any kind, especially outside London. So what happened was, this new economy, this new industrial economy, needed a new kind of money. And the private sector stepped in to provide that money. And what happened was that the big tech of the age was mining and manufacturing. The big tech of the age stepped in to make the money, the tokens. And there's an extremely good book about this by an economist called George Selgin, called Good Money. And he makes the point that the private coinage that was created at that time was critical to the success of the Industrial Revolution. Now, the companies that were making these coins, by and large, were in Birmingham. That's what's called the Birmingham button makers. Because the technology that you needed to make the coins was the technology that had been perfected in Birmingham. That was the centre of the English metal industry. Why? Because it was close to the coal fields, and you don't need to go through all this sort of stuff again. The copper came from mines in Wales. And so there were these copper pennies that they were making were quite often called druids, the ones that came from Wales. And very rapidly, this became the circulating money. It satisfied the need of the new economy. So why aren't we all using that money now? Well, there were sort of four things that came together to change things. So the first was the law. So after a few years of this, the government said, hold on a second, you should be using our money, not private money. And so they changed the law. And eventually in 1821, the government outlawed the private money completely. Whether that's a lesson for today or not, I'm not sure, because I don't know enough about the law, but there might be some people around in the building who can help out on that one. The second thing was technology, because the mint, at the start of the Industrial Revolution, they were still making coins using horse-drawn presses. So one of the lessons that we have from this is that the money for the new economy needs to be made using the technology of the new economy. And it took a while for the mint. And so, of course, what they did was they looked at the technology that the people making the private coins were using, and after a typically protracted, presumably there were royal commissions, I don't know, but it drags on for years. But eventually it's like, oh, well, actually this works, so we'll use it. So the technology was eventually adopted by the government. The third thing is the acceptance. Now, the acceptance thing was really interesting because the coins, the private coins, were very well made. And the reason they were very well made is because the people making the coins used the coins as an expression of their skill and ability. So the coins would have lovely designs on them, and they'd be beautifully made, because that was a way of kind of advertising how good you were at making this sort of stuff. So there was competition to make really good coins, and people preferred them. In fact, the exchange rate for the government money actually wasn't at par, because people preferred the private money to the government money. And then, of course, ultimately, it comes down to profit. Somebody in the government eventually said, hold on a second, why are these guys making all of this money, making pennies, when we could be making that money instead? And I'm sure people will talk about that argument today. I don't want to get into it, but the point is, as although the use of cash in circulation is falling, the amount of cash in circulation is actually going up because of drug dealing, prostitution, bribing politicians, that sort of thing. And there's a tension in that, because obviously the revenue from that goes to the Bank of England. The Bank of England, due to the law, it can't use that money for what banks use that money for, like putting it on the horses and things. It can only spend that money on government bonds. You see where this is going. But it's a lot of money, and the government eventually were like, what if there was something that was a bit like the private currency, except it was run by us, and then we'd keep the cash. So that brings us to where we are now. So what can we learn from that? I think we can learn quite a lot, especially this bit about going from the technology of the old revolution, of the old economy, to the technology of the new economy as being the way forward. So that token economy that I referred to originally, here's my super high level picture of the token economy. Again, I'm sure people will be talking about this today. We don't need to spend much time talking about it. On the left-hand side, you've got things that are fungible, which are the future of payments. On the right-hand side, you've got things that are not fungible, like Bitcoin, for example, which are the future of property. It's only one of the reasons why Bitcoin isn't money, Lee. I mean, there are others, but that's just one of them. So at just a super high level, we can think of what you're calling Web3 as the exchange of these two different kinds of tokens through a set of protocols. I'm teaching grandmothers to suck eggs here, so we'll move on from that. If you look in the bottom left-hand corner of that diagram, you'll see three different kinds of fungible, well, actually you'll see two, because there are sort of three different kinds of fungible tokens that we can use for money, but I'm ignoring the algorithmic ones because everyone knows they don't work and the whole thing blew up. So that leaves us with sort of two kinds of well, I mean, I suppose there is a possibility that in the future people might invent an algorithmic money that does work. So, but I don't know. Okay, so yes, so we've got two kinds there. We've got things that are based on other kinds of money and things that are based on other kind of asset. That gives us a rough outline. And for the purposes of this talk, which I'm not going to spend much time talking about now, I was going to talk about how CBDCs are a subset of that public money, but that's boring, so we'll move on. So I wrote a book a few years ago saying that I thought it was inevitable that the competition to provide these new kinds of money would escalate eventually to the nation state level because of this point from the past about eventually the government step in and provide this money. So eventually it becomes a competition at that higher level, which in practice turns into competition between the United States and everybody else. And I was right. So that's all I needed to say about that. Now, so you might say, well, okay, does that mean that we're not going to have CBDCs anymore because we're just going to use these stablecoins? The answer to that is no, because CBDCs and stablecoins are not the same thing at all. CBDCs have a completely different set of incentives and drivers. CBDCs are about social policy, net welfare, financial inclusion, they're about all sorts of things which aren't to do with more effective payments and the economic impact. So I think historically we've sort of jumbled up the idea that CBDCs will be government-issued stablecoins, and I think that's not true. And I can be dull at length about that in the coffee break if you want to go into it. In the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see what I regard as the most interesting part of the CBDC drivers, and this is where lessons from the past, the use of new technology in the stablecoin sector will intersect with the CBDC space, because in the bottom right-hand corner, the idea of a CBDC as a cash replacement is really rather dreary and limited. If we're going to have CBDCs, they should be a platform for innovation. They should be a platform for growing the economy. That takes us into the bottom right-hand corner, and that's the technological overlap. Okay, so what's changed since all of that? So everything I've said up until now, you could have read in books years ago, in David Boyle's and others. In fact, George Selgin also came and presented that book at the Digital Money Forum, as it happens. What's changed, in my view, is that the idea that the people using these things will be people is wrong. The more time I spend working in this area, the more convinced I am that the primary users of these new forms of money are actually going to be AIs and not people at all. And I don't want to go into it right now, but there's a couple of reasons for this. One of them is that banking and payments and financial markets and whatever are boring, and most people couldn't care less about it. So the sooner a bot will do it. Do you honestly, can you imagine when you go to pay for something at the store, you want to stand at the point of sale for 20 minutes thinking, well, I could use my Amex card and get my membership rewards, which I can trade for Avios. But do I need those Avios? Because, hold on, let me have a quick look at the calendar. Where am I going over the next 3 to 6 months? Let's just pop to the British Airways website, see how much those flights are. I do that, of course. But most people don't do that. So most of the stuff that we spend most of our time on is just not interesting to people. Do you really want to spend, I'm a normal middle-class English person. I do not want to spend another 2 days of my life next year working out which ISA to have and how to switch them. You all do it. And it's stupid because even the most rudimentary bot could do that in microseconds and make a better decision than you. What proportion of the population could make a better decision about those things than even the most basic bot? 1%? 0.1%? Unless you have really unusual conditions, like it's for Tony, for example, working out whether your butler's shirts are a tax-deductible thing for dry cleaning or not, that's a complex issue. But for most of us, it's bots. Do you really think I cared that much about paying for the parking at the station this morning? No, of course not. So what's changed in my thinking is we have to think about what it means to provide a new kind of money that's primarily not going to be used by people. I think that's where the interest is. Okay, so now let's look forward. Let's try and put those kind of two things together. So let's take the historical lesson and let's take my spin on the current situation and take it forward. And my starting point is the BIS economic report from last week, which we were just talking about, which says stablecoins often trade at varying exchanges, undermining singleness. So in other words, to the BIS, undermining singleness is a really bad thing because they're the people that have got the horse-drawn presses and are lovingly handcrafting coins out of solid mahogany. What if that's not true? What if the singleness of money is a historical factor that stemmed from the fact it was people using the money? What if it doesn't matter when you look forward? Okay, so is it possible that we could kind of imagine that or let me put it another way, has someone come up with an interesting way of thinking about the future of money where that's not true? And I rather like I like examples of thinking of things where people have thought what the problem is before there was the technological solution, like with aeroplanes and stuff like that. One of my favourite stories is how the British Parliament, so the guy that applied for a licence to run the first airmail service from England to India, it's the most lucrative airmail at the time, the most lucrative airmail route in the world was England to India. And a guy applied to run an airmail service using planes to fly from England to India. And Parliament turned him down on the grounds that it was 1845 and nobody had invented aeroplanes yet. Typically short-sighted views, in my opinion. But I admire that guy, because that guy was thinking, okay, I can't get an aeroplane to work, but somebody will get it to work. And then when they do get it to work, what will we use it for? Okay, and he thought about airmail. And he was right. That actually, because as it happened, the first commercial use of manned flight was airmail, albeit in the US in 1919. So here's another example of this that I absolutely love. This is a sat-nav from the 1920s. So this is, and of course I've centered it on Guildford. So we'd invented cars, right? So we'd invented roads, and so somebody thought, oh, well now we've got cars and roads, we need a way of helping people to get wherever they're going. And so they invented this primitive sat-nav. So you had, depending on where you wanted to go, so like I'm going from London to Brighton, so you choose the scroll that is the route you want to follow, and as you're driving, you turn the knobs and it shows you which road to take. That is fucking brilliant. Come on. You've invented roads and you've invented cars, and someone had the intelligence to think, okay, now we've got roads and cars, people will need to know how to get somewhere. I love this. This is one of my favorite examples. So now let's look at money and see if someone has done that with money. And here's my clue to this. So in Selgin's book about the copper tokens in circulation during the Industrial Revolution, he highlights this point, that although the tokens started off being made by big tech, i.e. the people who could manufacture the coins, and the coins were created as a means of demonstrating their skill and capability in this space, what soon happened was that businesses started producing. In other words, the people that needed the new kind of money suddenly began to produce the new kind of money. And I think it's funny that he highlights grocers and drapers, and I'm reading this in the same week that I'm reading articles in the Wall Street Journal about Walmart and Amazon looking at producing stable coins. Now, come on. That's beyond coincidence, right? So when we had the tokens the last time around, it started off with big tech, and then it became the people who needed them, who were the people that were bringing them into circulation. And I refer you to the bottom right-hand corner, where it said official copper was frequently and illegally refused. So even though the government made it the law that you had to use their money, people still wouldn't take it because they couldn't. So the beautiful coins that were made out of Welsh copper by druids, you know, they weren't really made by druids. That was just, they were made not even by Welsh people. The Welsh people just dug the copper out of the mines and they went to Birmingham. But the point is, people preferred those to the government money where they couldn't tell whether it was real or fake. So the real government money, even when it was a few, traded at a discount. So the singleness of money is an issue. Okay. So the timer still says 25 minutes. I think we're running into trouble here. So, okay. So in his book, so this is David Boyle's book, The Money Changers. So in his book, I just looked at it. It's interesting. I just looked it up on Amazon. I was just curious to see if they still had it on Amazon. And you can only buy second-hand copies. £154 for a second-hand copy. So I'm going to hang on to mine for a few more years. You know. I'm going to hodl my book. So apart from me, so one of the sections in David's book was called the IBM dollar, and it was written by a guy called Edward de Bono. I don't know if anyone here other than John is old enough to remember Edward de Bono. You do? So do you remember, like for people of my age, right, not you, but people my age, we probably all had to go through like management, like when you first joined a big company, you had to go through these management training things. Remember, we had to put different color hats on. And I don't remember, you remember the green hat was, you were the incompetent older son of the owner or something, and the black hat was you were the corrupt auditor, and the red hat was you. I can't remember what the hats were, but remember you had these different coloured hats to put on. That was Edward de Bono. And he invented lateral thinking, which is where all of that came from. But he also wrote an utterly brilliant piece called the IBM dollar. And remember, he wrote this before the internet. He was doing this as a thought experiment. And he started to think, well, hold on, if value is just things that are stored in computers and all the computers are stuck together, why would you need money? In other words, when company A buys something from company B, why wouldn't they just use baskets of these assets, as long as the assets can be traded in sufficiently liquid markets? Why would you bother converting the assets out into money, then trading the money, and then converting it back into assets? Why wouldn't you just trade the assets? And he said, you know, that sounds odd. Like I'm doing a deal with your company, and I say, well, okay, I would like, I don't know, I want these tins of paint, and in return, I've got these bus tickets, I've got some gold coins, and I've got a barrel of oil. Like, that sounds crazy if it's you and I doing that. But if it's AIs doing that, it's not crazy at all. And de Bono saw this coming. He said, you know, the continuous trading of these liquid assets would substitute for what we think of as money. Absolutely brilliant. So, in summary, again, I know this sounds mad, but when you think about it, it's not. Because the ability of the once you've got access to these liquid markets, that means the AIs can continuously price the assets. So we can always find whatever it is that we're exchanging, we can always find a bundle of assets that would meet that. And so his view was it wouldn't be that the government would issue these stable coins, but that IBM would. He used IBM as the example. It was a famous company in those days. So he said, why wouldn't IBM just issue its own money? Okay. And then companies would compete to keep the value of the money. Now, you take that and you use his thinking, but you apply it to Walmart and Amazon instead, and you see where this is going. Because actually, if Walmart money is worth, do you know, I think I'm right in saying a third of American consumers are part of Walmart Plus or whatever they call it. 20% of consumers are part of Amazon Prime. So if Walmart money is worth more at Walmart, and most people go to Walmart, then the demand for Walmart money will be high. People will want Walmart money. And the thing is, it won't be me that's doing it. Like when I'm walking to the store, like my AI knows that I'm going to the store to buy something at Walmart. So my AI will get the Walmart money, and it will work out what to trade away that it doesn't need at the moment. When you stop thinking about people buying things, and you start thinking, it's my AI talking to Walmart's AI. It's not me dicking around at the Walmart point of sale with a handful of cards. That's not the experience. Then the whole use of stablecoins completely transforms the way that commerce will be conducted. So my point is, ultimately, both the history and the future of stablecoins are much more complicated and much more interesting than I think most of you would have thought coming into the room. Thank you for listening. Yeah, no, I'm happy to wait for, but I can't see any questions on here. I'll just go to people in the room. Yes, gentleman down the front. I've never seen you before in my life, have I?
David, I love you, man. Your book on identity and new money is one of the best things I've ever read. I recommend it to everyone.
You're very kind.
First principle thinking. I think you said that payments is identity plus accounting entries, and the hard part is the identity, not the accounting entries. So love it. All-time favorite. Just on the Amazon thing, again, another historical example. Back in the day, we had factories and factory towns and factory shops, and the factory workers would be paid in factory scrip. If Amazon pays the Chinese suppliers in Amazon stablecoin, we're back to that system. 70% of the stuff made in Amazon is made in China. So I don't think an Amazon stablecoin is about people paying Amazon with that stablecoin. It's about Amazon paying the Chinese suppliers.
I agree, and the Chinese suppliers would hold the Amazon coins,
of course,
because the Amazon coins are valuable to people who are buying things at Amazon, which is everybody.
It's back to the. I'm just giving the example to give a, flesh out what you're saying, that we're going back to company script.
I mean, I think obviously it's too complicated an issue to go into right now, but one of my favorite I have favorite boring stories about everything, but one of my favorite stories about company script is that the Parker Brothers presses that we used to make Monopoly money, in 1933 we used to print Depression script. So actually Monopoly money went into circulation in America because of that. So company money is not new, but I think the technology means we have to think about that in a sort of different way. So I have one more book for the next question. Please, you sir. Oh, sorry. I literally can't see anywhere. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize there were questions up there. I apologize, but I can't read them anyway.
Hi.
So we'll go to the gentleman there.
I'm from the U.S. Thank you for being here. My question, how far are we from citizens mistrusting governments so much that we don't want their money and we prefer other private types of money?
Are you here as an interested member of the general public, or do you represent any branch of the US government? Okay, I'm scared already. You're a big guy. Look, I think trust is a very complex issue. But if the question is it, can you conceivably imagine a future where people would prefer to hold, I mean, we're using Amazon the example. Is it possible to imagine a future where people would prefer to hold Amazon money than other kinds of money, including government money? Possibly. I wouldn't rule that out at all. I would assume that because of the pressures involved here, governments, I imagine, would respond by trying to make their money more... The thing is, you don't want the money to be stable, because if you're the government, you want the ability to... I mean, people say, oh, well, this is terrible because the US can print dollars and this gives it an exorbitant privilege and that sort of. All of this is true, but the alternative, which is that governments couldn't print money, is not worth imagining, because we already know what happens then, because we saw the Great Depression. We don't want to go back to those days. So I'm not smart enough. You need to talk to an economist, but I can imagine a situation where you have a bundle of monies and government money is one of them, but it's not sort of uniquely privileged anymore. So. Oh, okay.
Morning, David. John Orchard, Digital Monetary Institute.
Hey, John.
Hi, good morning. In the very intriguing scenario just painted, essentially atomized barter instead of money, how would that interact with the creation of credit, and would it need to?
Well, I mean, you've actually answered it inside the question, because you said atomized barter, but it's not atomized barter, it's atomized debt. Those monies that are issued are debt, and if you're a Graeberite, which I imagine quite a few people in the audience are, that's a very pure form of money. So the idea that so if you get an IBM dollar, the reason you'll hold an IBM dollar is because you'll want to buy IBM products and services in the future, and it'll be cheaper for you to buy it with IBM dollars than any other way. But of course, the price of those IBM dollars, because they are debt, the price of those IBM dollars depends on what you think about the future prospects of IBM. This is where things get a bit blurred between money and equities around that sort of thing. But you're right. You know, as a way of creating credit, it's rather an interesting idea. So I have a new company. I could go to the bank and borrow some money, or I could just print my own money. You know, like if you're going to go really kind of bottom up on this, if you don't like their money, make your own, basically. And of course, if I say, well, you know, here's Dave's great new business idea, right? Not usedcondoms.com. We're going to try something different this time. So Dave's new business idea. So I will print Dave coins, and of course those Dave coins will trade at a colossal discount, because you don't know. All right, I'll pick a different example. Green energy. I'm going to make a windmill that will produce green energy. So I just print Dave coins that you can use to pay for that electricity in the future. At the beginning, they trade at a massive discount. You don't even know if I'm going to actually build the damn windmill. But once the windmill's built and it's working, the value of those Dave coins would then go up above their original value, because they're the best way to buy my fantastic green energy. So as a substitute for, I think you're right thinking that way, John. As a potential substitute for credit, they are. I have to get off, right? Yeah. Thanks very much for the questions.
I think next year we're just going to do DaveCon with Dave Coin, and we can spend the whole day quizzing Dave and his amazing brain about all these ideas. I know there were lots of questions on the Slido, so hopefully if you didn't get a chance to ask him, you can come and see him at the coffee break, and he's going to be signing some of his books.